The rain was coming down hard, turning the city streets into a mess of gray puddles and blurred headlights. Inside the car, though, it was quiet. Too quiet. 10-year-old Maya sat in the back seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was wearing her best dress, which was really just a hand-me-down from someone else. It was a little too big in the shoulders and a bit too short at the wrists, but it was clean. That was all that mattered. Or at least that was what Mrs. Gable had told her. Mrs. Gable was the social worker sitting in the driver's seat. She had a kind face, but today it looked tired. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Maya, offering a small, tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She knew how important this day was. Maya knew it too. This wasn't just another meeting with a potential foster family. This was the big one. If this didn't work out, Maya was headed back to the group home for teenagers, a place where kids like her got lost in the shuffle. He is a very particular man, Mrs. Gable said, breaking the silence as the car turned onto a long private road. The houses here were huge. They looked like castles compared to the places Maya was used to. Mr. Sterling has a very specific way of doing things. You just need to be polite, answer his questions, and be yourself. Okay, Maya nodded, though her stomach was doing flip-flops. Yes, ma'am, she whispered. She looked out the window as the car pulled up to a massive iron gate. It swung open slowly, revealing a mansion that seemed to go on forever. There were perfectly trimmed bushes and a fountain in the middle of the driveway that sparkled even in the gloomy rain. When the car stopped, the air smelled expensive. It's like fresh-cut grass and something else Maya couldn't quite place. Maybe just the smell of money. They walked up the stone steps to the front door, which was made of heavy, dark wood. Before Mrs. Gable could even knock, it swung open. Standing there was a tall man with silver hair and a suit that looked like it cost more than Mrs. Gable's car. This was Mr. Arthur Sterling. He didn't smile. He didn't say hello or come in out of the rain, just looked at them, his eyes sharp and assessing, like a man looking at a piece of fruit to see if it was rotten. "You are late," he said. His voice deep and echoing in the hallway. Mrs. Gable checked her watch. "Only by 2 minutes, Mr. Sterling. The traffic was—" "I do not like excuses," snapped, stepping aside to let them in. "Come in. Do not drip water on my floor." Maya quickly wiped her feet on the mat, even though her shoes were barely damp. She followed Mrs. Gable inside, feeling incredibly small. The hallway was massive, with paintings on the walls and a floor that shone so much she could see her reflection in it. It felt cold. It didn't feel like a home where people laughed or watched TV. It felt like a museum. Mr. Sterling led them into a living room that was larger than the entire common room at the group home. There were expensive sofas, thick curtains, and a fireplace that wasn't lit, making the room feel even chillier. He gestured for them to sit, but he remained standing. He walked over to the window and looked out at the rain, his back to them for a moment. "So," he said, turning around, "this is the girl." "Yes, this is Maya," Mrs. Gable said, her voice trying to be bright. "Maya, say hello to Mr. Sterling." "Hello, Mr. Sterling," Maya said, her voice shaking a little. He walked over to her and looked down. He didn't scare her, not exactly, but he made her feel nervous, like she was walking on a tightrope. He looked at her dress, at her clean but worn-out shoes, and finally at her face. It felt like he was looking for cracks. "I read her file," Mr. Sterling said, turning away from Maya and pacing the room. "Parents passed away 5 years ago. Moved around 3 different homes. Average grades. No remarkable skills in sports or academics. Is that correct?" Maya felt her face get hot. She knew she wasn't special. She knew she wasn't a genius. But hearing it said out loud like a list of mistakes made her heart sink. She is a very sweet and obedient child. "Mr. Sterling," Mrs. Gable defended quickly. "She helps around the house, she is quiet, and she's very grateful for any opportunity." Mr. Sterling stopped pacing. "Obedience is not enough, Mrs. Gable. I am not running a charity here. I am looking for a legacy. I have everything a person could want in this house, except someone to leave it to. But I am not going to leave my life's work to just anyone. They need to have potential. They need to have a soul that understands beauty. He stopped and pointed a finger toward the corner of the room. Maya followed his gaze. There, in the shadows, stood the biggest piano she had ever seen. It was black and shiny, looking like a sleeping beast. It was grand and terrifying. Do you see that? Mr. Sterling asked. That is a Steinway. It is worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. It is my greatest treasure. My late wife played it every day. It is the heart of this home. Maya looked at the piano, then back at him. She had never played a piano in her life. She had seen them on television, and sometimes in the windows of music stores when she walked past. But she had never touched the keys. Mrs. Gable shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Mr. Sterling, I don't think we discussed music lessons. It can certainly be arranged, but Maya doesn't have any training yet. I am not interested in training, Mr. Sterling said coldly. I am interested in talent. I am interested in the spark one is born with. If I am going to adopt this girl, if I am going to bring her into my family and give her everything I have, she must be able to speak my language. And the language of this house is music. The room went dead silent. Maya looked at Mrs. Gable with wide eyes. The social worker looked shocked. She opened her mouth to speak, to argue that this wasn't fair. That you can't judge a child's worth by a skill they haven't learned. But Mr. Sterling held up a hand to stop her. He walked over to where Maya was sitting on the edge of the sofa. He loomed over her. Here's the deal, little one. You go over to that piano. You play for me? If you can play something, if you can touch those keys and show me that you have a gift, that you belong in this world of art and beauty, then I will sign the papers today. You will live here. You will have your own room. You will go to good schools, and you will never want for anything again. He paused, letting the weight of his offer hang in the air. It was everything Maya had ever dreamed of. A real home. A father. Safety. But he continued, his voice dropping low. If you cannot play, if you just sit there and make noise, then you do not belong here. I am not looking for a project. I am looking for an heir. If you fail, the deal is off. You leave, and I will never consider this again. Mrs. Gable stood up, her face red. Mr. Sterling, you cannot be serious. She is 10 years old. You can't expect her to sit down, Mrs. Gable, he said calmly. I am dead serious. Maya felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her. She looked at the massive piano in the corner. It looked miles away. Her hands were sweating. She thought about the group home, the cold bunk beds, the noise, the feeling of being invisible. If she got up and walked out that door right now, she was going back there. But if she touched those keys and couldn't make music, she was going back there too. It felt like a trap. It felt impossible. Well, Mr. Sterling asked, raising an eyebrow. He looked at his expensive watch. I am a busy man. Do we have a deal, or do I call the driver to take you back? He didn't say it with anger. He said it like a businessman. He was talking about her future, her entire life, as if it were a simple transaction. But to Maya, it was everything. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling like jelly. She didn't look at Mrs. Gable. She didn't look at Mr. Sterling. She looked only at the piano. She knew she couldn't play. She knew she was going to fail, but for some reason, her feet started moving. She took one step, then another. She walked toward the black beast in the corner, walking toward what might be the end of her only chance at a family. The silence in the room was heavy, pressing down on her ears, louder than the thunder outside. The walk across the room felt like the longest journey Maya had ever taken. The plush carpet was so thick under her worn-out shoes that she almost stumbled, but she kept her eyes forward. The piano seemed to get bigger with every step. Up close, it was terrifying. It was glossy black and looked as hard as stone. It wasn't like the dusty, forgotten furniture she was used to. This thing looked powerful, like it demanded respect. It smelled of wax and old wood, scent that made Maya think of libraries and places where you had to be whisper quiet. Behind her, she could hear Mrs. Gable shifting in her chair. The social worker made a small, choking sound, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Maya knew Mrs. Gable was upset. She knew this wasn't fair. In the real world, kids didn't get adopted because they could perform tricks like a circus animal. But this wasn't the real world. This was Mr. Sterling's world, and right now, he held all the power. Maya stopped right in front of the piano bench. It was a long, padded seat covered in dark red velvet. She hesitated. Looking over her shoulder, she saw Mr. Sterling standing by the fireplace. He hadn't moved. He was checking his watch again, his face cold and bored. He looked like a man who was already deciding what he was going to have for dinner, completely uninterested in the little girl standing in his living room. He didn't think she could do it. He probably just wanted her to fail so he could go back to his quiet life. The realization stung. Maya looked down at her hands. They were small, with chipped nails and a few faint scars from climbing trees and helping with chores at the group home. These were hands that knew how to wash dishes, how to tie shoelaces, and how to hold onto a backpack strapped tight when she was nervous. They were not hands that knew music. She didn't know where middle C was. She didn't know a chord from a key. To her, the 88 black and white keys looked like a confusing code she would never be able to break. Mrs. Gable stood up. "Maya," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, full of pity. It was the sound of a grown-up trying to let a kid down easy. "You don't have to do this. It's okay. We can go." Maya closed her eyes for a second. We can go. That meant going back to the gray building with the peeling paint. It meant eating lukewarm food in a cafeteria with 50 other noisy kids. It meant moving again in 6 months when the funding ran out or when the new foster parent got tired. It meant having no one to tuck her in at night and no one to care if she got sick. If she walked away now, she would survive. She was good at surviving, but she didn't want to just survive anymore. She wanted to live here. She wanted to belong to someone, even if that someone was a grumpy old man with impossible standards. She took a deep breath and ignored Mrs. Gable. She stepped closer and sat down on the bench. It was firm, but comfortable. When she sat there, her arms were at the right height, almost as if the piano had been waiting just for her. She stared at the keys. They were white and bright, except for a few that had tiny smudges on them. Mr. Sterling sighed loudly. The sound was like a stone dropping into a pond. "Time is money," he said from across the room. "If you are simply going to sit there and stare, I would prefer you leave." Maya flinched at his voice. Her heart was hammering so hard against her ribs that she thought it might jump right out of her chest. She felt a hot tear slide down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away with her sleeve. She couldn't cry here. Crying was for babies, and she had to be a grown-up right now. She had to figure out a way to make music, or at least something that sounded like it. With zero experience, she hovered her hands over the keys. They were shaking. She was terrified to touch them. What if she hit a wrong note and it sounded terrible? What if the piano screamed at her? But the silence in the room was even worse. The waiting was unbearable. "Think, Maya, think," she told herself. What do you know? She didn't know scales. She didn't know Mozart or Beethoven. But she did have a memory. It was her most precious treasure, something she kept locked up tight inside her head where nobody could touch it. It was the memory of her mother, before the accident. Before the group homes and the social workers, there had been a small apartment and a music box. It wasn't a fancy one. It was made of cheap wood with a painted ballerina on top. The paint was chipped off the ballerina's face, and when you opened the lid, the little dancer didn't spin very well. But the music had been beautiful. Every night, her mother would wind the little silver key on the back. Click, click, click. Then the lid would open, and that tiny, tinkling melody would fill the room. It was a simple tune, repetitive and sweet. Her mother would hum along with it, rocking Maya to sleep. That song was the sound of safety. It was the sound of love. Maya hadn't heard it in 5 years, but she knew it note for note. She could hear it in her head as clearly as if the music box were sitting right in front of her. She hummed the first note quietly under her breath. Her right hand moved. It felt clumsy, like a heavy weight attached to her wrist. She didn't know which note corresponded to the sound in her head. She just had to guess. She looked at the white keys. There were so many of them. Patterns of 2 black keys, then 3 black keys. It seemed confusing, but maybe, just maybe, the sound was hiding somewhere in the middle. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. Ready to call the whole thing off? Mrs. Gable had her hand on her purse, ready to grab Maya and leave. Maya knew she had exactly one try. If the first sound was bad, he would stop her. She took a breath, held it, let her index finger fall onto one of the white keys near the center. Plunk. It was a deep, resonant sound. It echoed through the room, bouncing off the high ceilings. To Maya, it sounded like a heavy stone dropping into water. It wasn't the note from her music box. It was too low. But it wasn't terrible. It was just a start. She froze, waiting for Mr. Sterling to yell, to tell her to get out, but he didn't say anything. The silence returned, waiting for the next sound. Maya moved her finger slightly to the right. She pressed another key. This one was higher. Ping. Then another. Ting. She was hunting, pecking at the keys like a bird looking for a crumb. She felt foolish. She was just making noise. She wasn't playing music. But then she found a pattern. She pressed a white key, then the next black key, then another white key. The three notes rang out together. Ding, ding, ding. Her heart skipped a beat. That sounded familiar. That sounded like the beginning of the melody. It wasn't perfect. Her timing was shaky, but the tone was right. She looked at her hands. They were still hovering over the keys, terrified to commit. The poor girl touched the keys, unsure of herself, searching for a memory in a room full of strangers. She was just a kid in a second-hand dress, sitting at a piano worth a fortune, trying to buy a family with a song she remembered from a dream. She could feel Mr. Sterling's eyes burning into her back. She could feel Mrs. Gable's anxiety. The pressure was immense, crushing down on her small shoulders. But for some reason, as her fingers rested on those cold ivory keys, the fear started to mix with something else. A tiny spark of determination. She closed her eyes, blocking out the rich room, the cruel man, and the worried social worker. She pictured the chipped ballerina. She pictured her mother's hand winding the key. And she let her fingers press down again, trying to find the next note in the sequence. Maya kept her eyes squeezed shut. It was easier that way. If she looked at the keys, she would just see a mess of black and white stripes that made no sense. But if she closed her eyes, she could see the music box in her mind. She could see the little golden handle on the back, the one she used to turn with her small fingers until it wouldn't turn anymore. Click, click, click. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Her right hand felt heavy, like it didn't belong to her. But she forced her ring finger to land on a white key, just to the right of the one she had touched before. The note rang out, clear and high. It was the right note. She was sure of it. It matched the pitch in her head perfectly. Then came the hard part. The melody went up and down, twisting like a winding path. She had to find the next note quickly, before the sound of the first one faded away. Her fingers didn't move like a professional player's fingers. They didn't float or dance. They stumbled. She moved her middle finger down to keys and pressed another white one. Clunk. It sounded a bit dull, a little wooden, but it was close enough. Mrs. Gable had stopped breathing. The poor social worker was standing halfway to the door, her hand hovering over her bag, but she couldn't move. She was hearing something that shouldn't be possible. She knew Maya's file. It said no musical training. It said average performance in school. Yet here was the girl picking out a tune that actually sounded like a song. Mr. Sterling was also listening. The annoyance on his face shifted slightly. His eyebrows pulled together, not in anger, but in confusion. He crossed his arms, waiting for the girl to mess up. He expected her to hit a wrong note, to lose the rhythm, to prove that she was just guessing. But the guessing was holding together. Maya's mind was racing. She was playing a mental game of chase with the music. The song in her head was playing on a loop, and her hands were trying to catch up. Remember the turn, she told herself? The high part. She remembered how the ballerina would spin faster when the music went up. She stretched her pinky finger out, reaching for a key further up the keyboard. She hit it, and it chimed like a tiny bell. It was the climax of the verse. The notes were coming faster now. She wasn't thinking about names like C sharp or G major. She was thinking about feelings. She was thinking about how cold the floor was in the group home and how warm the music box used to make her feel. She pressed 3 keys in a row, fast, then jumped her hand back down to the lower notes to start the phrase again. Her left hand was just sitting in her lap, useless. She knew real piano players used to hands, but she didn't have the coordination for that. She was pouring everything she had into her right hand. Her palm was sweating, making her skin slip on the keys a little. She had to wipe her hand on her dress quickly without stopping the flow of the music. The silence in the room was gone now. The sound of the piano filled every corner. It wasn't a loud or banging sound. It was a fragile, gentle melody. It sounded sad, but there was a little bit of hope in it too. It was the sound of someone waiting for something good to happen. Mr. Sterling walked a little closer. He didn't sit down, but he stood near the edge of the rug, tilting his head to listen. For the first time, he really looked at Maya. He saw how her shoulders were hunched forward, how she was biting her lip in concentration. He saw the dirt under her fingernails and the worn hem of her dress. She looked so small sitting there, but the sound she was creating was big enough to fill the huge, empty house. That tune, Mr. Sterling murmured quietly to himself. He didn't recognize it. It wasn't Bach or Mozart. It wasn't a famous pop song. It sounded old, like a folk song from a long time ago. Maya didn't hear him. She was too focused. She was coming up on the part of the song where the music box would always slow down because the spring was losing its power. The notes became slower, wider apart. She mimicked that perfectly, letting the space between the keys grow. She pressed a key, let the sound hang in the air for a second, then pressed another. Her heart wasn't pounding anymore. Instead, it was beating in time with the music. Thump, note, thump, note. She felt a strange sensation in her chest, like a light turning on. She wasn't scared anymore. She was busy. She was doing something. For the first time in years, she wasn't just a girl waiting for a home. She was a girl making music. She played the last line of the verse. It was a series of descending notes that sounded like a sigh. When she hit the final note, she let it ring out, her finger pressing the key down firmly. She held it there, listening to the vibration fade until the string inside the piano stopped shaking. She opened her eyes. The room was quiet again. But it wasn't the heavy, cold silence from before. It felt different. The air seemed to have changed. Maya pulled her hand back from the keys and folded them in her lap. She looked down at her shoes. She suddenly felt very shy. She realized what she had just done. She had walked up to a stranger's expensive instrument and banged out a song from a memory. She had been bold, maybe too bold. She turned around on the bench to look at them. Mrs. Gable was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. She wasn't wiping them away. She just stared at Maya with her mouth slightly open. Even Mr. Sterling looked different. He wasn't looking at his watch. He was looking at the piano, then at Maya, then back at the piano. Maya felt her face get hot. I don't know the notes, she stammered, her voice tiny in the big room. I just know how it sounds. Oh. She waited for Mr. Sterling to tell her it wasn't good enough. She waited for him to say that playing by ear didn't count. She waited for him to point to the door. But he just stood there, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. It wasn't a smile, but it wasn't a frown either. It was a look of deep curiosity, like a scientist who just found a bug he had never seen before. Mr. Sterling didn't speak for a long time. The only sound in the room was the soft tick-tock of a large grandfather clock standing near the window and the quiet sniffle from Mrs. Gable. Maya sat frozen on the bench, her hands resting in her lap. She felt like she had just run a mile. Her heart was beating fast, but now that the music had stopped, the fear came rushing back in. She worried that maybe she had made him angry by touching his expensive instrument without permission. She looked up at him, trying to read his face. It was like trying to read a rock. He wasn't frowning, but he wasn't smiling either. He was just staring at the piano keys, almost as if he was looking right through them to the strings inside. He walked slowly across the room, his steps heavy on the thick carpet. He stopped right in front of the piano, towering over Maya. Play it again, he said. His voice wasn't as sharp as before. It was low and serious. Maya blinked in surprise. You want me to play it again? Did I stutter? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Play it again. From the beginning, Maya turned back to the keys. Her hands were shaking a little more this time. The pressure was on. The first time was a surprise. This time, it was a test. She closed her eyes again, trying to find that safe place in her mind where the music box lived. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the starting keys. She started the song. It was a little bit better this time. Her fingers remembered the path they had just taken. She hit the high notes with a bit more confidence. She tried to make the rhythm smoother, to hold the notes just a little longer, to let them sing. As she played, she poured all her longing into the tune. She wasn't just pressing plastic and ivory. She was telling a story. She was telling him about the nights she spent wishing for a family, about the cold beds, and about the warm memory of her mother. Mr. Sterling stood beside the piano, listening intently. He didn't look bored anymore. He looked fascinated. He watched her hands. They were small and rough, not the delicate hands of a trained pianist, but they moved with a strange kind of grace. He noticed that she didn't play like she was reading a book. She played like she was remembering a conversation. She played with feeling. When Maya reached the end of the song and let the final note fade away, she waited. Mr. Sterling reached out and gently touched the top of the piano, almost caressing the wood. That was a lullaby, he said. It wasn't a question, a very old one. Not something you would hear on the radio? Maya nodded slowly. It was from my mother's music box. She played it for me when I was little, and you have had no lessons. He asked. No, sir, Maya whispered. I just hear it in my head and my hands try to find it. Mrs. Gable stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. See, she has a gift, Mr. Sterling. This is natural talent. You can't teach that kind of emotion. Mr. Sterling didn't look at Mrs. Gable. He kept his eyes fixed on Maya. Technique is abysmal, he said bluntly. Your posture is terrible. Your timing is shaky. You play like a savage. Maya felt her stomach drop. The compliment she thought was coming vanished. She looked down at her lap, fighting back tears. She knew she wasn't a professional. She was just a kid. But, Mr. Sterling continued, his voice changing tone, the touch. The touch is honest. You play with your heart, not just your fingers. That is something I have not heard in a very long time. Most students who come here play like robots. They hit the right notes because they are told to, but there is nothing inside. You. He paused, looking for the right word. You sound like you have something to say. He walked around the bench and stood behind Maya. He placed his hands on her shoulders. They were heavy and warm. Maya stiffened, not used to being touched by an adult unless she was in trouble. This house, Mr. Sterling said, speaking more to himself than to her, has been silent for too long. Since my wife died, the music here has only been noise. It had no soul. I thought I needed a genius to fill the silence. I thought I needed someone who could play perfect scales. He squeezed her shoulders gently. I was wrong. I do not need a robot. I need someone who understands that music is about feeling. Someone who can look at a pile of wood and wire and hear a memory. He looked over at Mrs. Gable. The agreement was that if she could play, she stays. Mrs. Gable let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Yes, that was the agreement. Mr. Sterling walked over to his desk. It was a massive piece of furniture made of dark mahogany. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick stack of papers. He flipped through them until he found the one he was looking for. He picked up a fancy pen and clicked the top. The contract, he said. I have already reviewed your background check, Mrs. Gable. The home study is acceptable. There is only one signature missing. He walked back to the middle of the room and laid the paper down on the coffee table. He looked at Maya. Or Messi. You are uneducated, and you are likely going to be a great deal of trouble to raise. Maya didn't know what to say. Was this a yes? Was he still making fun of her? However, Mr. Sterling signed his name on the paper with a flourish. You have a home here. If you want it, The scratch of the pen on the paper was the loudest sound Maya had ever heard. It sounded like a door unlocking. Mrs. Gable rushed forward, her hands shaking as she looked at the paper. "Oh, thank goodness. Mr. Sterling, you won't regret this. I promise." "Don't make promises you can't keep," Mr. Sterling said gruffly, though his face softened just a fraction. He capped his pen and looked at Maya. "Well, don't sit there like a bump on a log. Stand up." Maya stood up. Her legs felt wobbly. She looked from the paper to the man. I can stay." "You've signed no papers yet," Mr. Sterling said. "Mrs. Gable will handle the legal details. But as far as I am concerned, you are no longer a guest. You are family." The word hung in the air. Family. Maya had heard people say it on TV shows. She had heard other kids at the group home talk about going back to their real families. But she never thought she would hear it directed at her, especially not from a man like this. "But there is a condition," Mr. Sterling added, his voice becoming stern again. "You played a song for me? Now, I will do something for you. You will go to school. You will learn to read and write properly. And you will learn to play this piano the correct way. No more guessing. If you are going to live in my house, you will be the best. Do you understand?" Maya nodded frantically. She didn't care about the hard work. She didn't care if she had to practice for hours every day. "Yes, sir. I promise. I'll learn." "Good," he said. He walked over to the fireplace and pressed a button. The fire roared to life, casting a warm orange glow over the room. The chill that had been in the air seemed to vanish instantly. Then it has settled. Turned to look at them. "Mrs. Gable, you may go. I will call the driver to take you back to the city. Maya will stay here. I will have the cook prepare something for dinner. She looks like she hasn't had a decent meal in a week." Mrs. Gable looked at Maya. There were tears in the social worker's eyes, but they were happy tears now. She hugged Maya tight. "Be good, okay? Listen to him. This is a miracle, Maya. Don't waste it." "I won't," Maya whispered into her shoulder. "Thank you." When Mrs. Gable left, the front door clicked shut, and Maya was alone with Mr. Sterling. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The silence wasn't scary anymore. It was peaceful. The fire was crackling, and the rain was still hitting the windows. But inside, everything was different. "Come here," Mr. Sterling said, waving his hand. Maya walked over to him. He didn't hug her. That was clearly too much to ask for. But he did something that surprised her. He pointed to the bookshelf on the wall. "Do you see those books?" Maya looked. There were hundreds of them. "Yes, those are music books," he said. "Someday you will read them. But tonight, we start small." He walked over to the piano bench and sat down. He patted the spot next to him. "Sit." Maya sat down next to him. He smelled like old paper, an expensive cologne. He reached out and placed his large hand over hers. "Show me how you started." "The very first note." Maya reached out and pressed the key. The sound rang out. "Good," Mr. Sterling said softly. He reached over and pressed the key next to it with his other hand. A harmony rang out. It sounded beautiful together. And this makes a chord. Two sounds becoming one, just like us. We are very different, you and I. But perhaps together, we can make something worth listening to. For the first time in her life, Maya didn't feel like an orphan. She didn't feel like a burden. She sat on the velvet bench, next to the grumpy old man, and she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The poor girl who touched the keys had finally found her song. The first few weeks in the Sterling house were a blur of new sensations for Maya. She had her own room, which was bigger than the entire living room of her last foster placement. It had a soft bed with a duvet that felt like sleeping on a cloud, and a window that looked out over a garden that seemed to go on forever. But it wasn't just the things that were different. It was the feeling of the air. It was quiet and calm. There was no shouting, no television blasting late at night, and no sound of other kids arguing over toys, however. Life with Mr. Sterling wasn't like a fairy tale. He didn't suddenly turn into a cuddly grandfather. He was still strict. He woke her up early every morning for breakfast. where they ate oatmeal and toast in a mostly silence that wasn't mean, but just focused. He expected her to sit up straight, use her utensils properly, and finish her food. But after breakfast, the real work began. Every day at 4 o'clock, they went to the music room. At first, Maya was terrified. She thought he would make her play her song over and over again. But Mr. Sterling had other plans. He sat her down on the bench and pulled out a book that looked ancient, with brown, crinkly pages. "You play by ear," he told her, tapping the cover. "That is a gift, but it is not enough. If you only play what is in your head, you will run out of songs. You need to learn the language. You need to read music." The lessons were hard. It was like learning a whole new alphabet. The notes looked like little black spiders crawling on the lines of the staff. Mr. Sterling was a tough teacher. If her fingering was wrong, he would tap her hand gently with a ruler and make her do it again. If she didn't practice her scales, he would look at her over his glasses until she felt so guilty she would run to the piano to fix it. "Do not guess," he would say, when she tried to fudge a hard note. "Think. Look at the page. Trust what is written there." But he was also patient in a way she hadn't expected. When she got frustrated and tears welled up in her eyes because she couldn't get the rhythm right, he didn't get angry. He would stop the clock, pour her a glass of water, tell her a story about his wife, or about the composers who wrote the music. He told her that even the greatest masters made mistakes. He taught her that making a mistake wasn't the end of the world. It was just a sign that you were learning. One rainy afternoon, about 2 months after she arrived, Maya was struggling with a piece by a composer named Bosch. It was complicated and fast, and her fingers felt like sausages. She slammed her hands down on the keys in frustration. "I can't do it," she yelled. "I'm just a girl from the city. I'm not a genius. I don't know why you even wanted me." Mr. Sterling was sitting in his armchair reading a newspaper. He lowered the paper slowly and looked at her. He didn't yell back. He just stood up and walked over to the piano. He sat down on the bench next to her. "You're right," he said calmly. Maya sniffled and looked at him, shocked. "I am. You are not a genius," he said. "Not yet. You are messy. You want to get to the end without doing the work." Maya wiped her nose with her sleeve, feeling hurt. "But," he continued, placing his hand on the keys, "you have courage. Do you know how many students I have had who were perfect? They could play the notes perfectly, but they were scared to make a mistake. They were like porcelain dolls. Pretty, but empty. You, Maya, you play like you are fighting for something. And you were. You were fighting for a home." Played a few notes of the song she had played on that first date, the lullaby from her music box. "That day you walked in here, you had nothing but the clothes on your back and a memory in your head. You sat down and you offered me the only thing you had. That is not genius. That is love. And that is something I cannot teach." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "I am an old man, Maya. I have money, and I have this big house. But it is empty without people to fill it. I didn't adopt you because I wanted a robot to play piano. I adopted you because when you played that song, this house felt like a home again. I just needed you to stay." Maya looked at him. She saw the loneliness in his face that she hadn't noticed before. She realized that they were saving each other. She was getting a family, and he was getting a reason to keep going. So he said, standing up, "Stop crying. It makes your nose red. Try the section again. And this time, slow down. You are not in a race." Maya laughed a little through her tears. She nodded and placed her hands back on the keys. She played the section again, slowly and carefully. It sounded better. Months turned into a year. The changes in Maya were small but steady. Her posture got better. Her grades at school improved because she had learned how to focus. Her hands, which had once been rough and unsure, now moved across the keys with confidence. She learned to love the difficult pieces, finding beauty in the complicated patterns. One evening, Mr. Sterling held a small dinner party. He invited a few friends, serious-looking people in suits and dresses. Maya was nervous. She was wearing a new dress, a pale blue one that fit perfectly. She served the soup and tried to stay out of the way, but as dinner finished, Mr. Sterling stood up and tapped his glass with a spoon. "I have an announcement," he said to the room. And a request. He waved his hand toward Maya. My daughter, whom many of you have not heard play yet, has agreed to play for us. The room went quiet. Maya felt her face turn red. She looked at Mr. Sterling, and he gave her a small nod. It was the same look he gave her when she knew she was ready. It wasn't a test this time. It was a gift. She walked over to the piano. The lights were dimmed and the fire was crackling. It was just like that first day, but everything was different. She wasn't the poor girl in the borrowed dress anymore. She was Maya Sterling. She sat down and adjusted the bench. She didn't play a simple nursery rhyme. She played a piece by Chopin that she had been working on for months. It was beautiful and flowing, full of ups and downs. She let her fingers fly, trusting the training Mr. Sterling had given her. But she also put her heart into it, just like she did with the music box. The room was silent as she played. When she hit the final chords and let them fade into silence, the room stayed quiet for a second. Then Mr. Sterling began to clap. Slowly at first, and then loudly. His friends joined in, smiling and nodding their approval. Maya stood up and bowed, her heart bursting with happiness. She looked over at Mr. Sterling. He was clapping harder than anyone else. He wasn't looking at his friends. He was looking at her, and there was a smile on his face. It was a small, crooked smile, but it reached his eyes. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet again, Maya walked into the music room. Mr. Sterling was there, putting the sheet music away. You did well, he said. Thank you, Maya said. She hesitated for a moment. Dad, the word hung in the air. She had never said it before. She had always called him Mr. Sterling. He stopped what he was doing and turned around. He looked at her for a long moment. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked over and placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. He didn't hug her, because that wasn't who he was. But he squeezed her shoulder, firm and strong. Yes, he answered simply. It was enough. It was more than enough. Maya smiled. She looked at the piano, the instrument that had changed her life. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a bridge. She looked back at the man who gave her a chance when nobody else would. Good night, Dad, she said. Good night, Maya, he replied. Practice is at 9 tomorrow. Don't be late. I won't, she said, turning to leave. As she walked up the stairs to her warm bedroom, she listened to the sound of the rain against the windows. It wasn't a lonely sound anymore. It was just rain. She was safe, she was home, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. The poor girl had found her song, and she had found her family.